Hi, my name's Leisha and welcome to today's episode. This is part of a year-long series that I'm doing at the moment, which is the year of actually trying, and this is the 7th episode. And in today's episode, we're going to be looking at some books and a couple of films, although I'm just going to preface that by saying that I am not a film person. I don't really get films, as people tend to say. I just watch things that I enjoy, and I will normally watch the same things again and again that I enjoy. So yeah, but I've sprinkled a few in. But we're mostly focusing on books that have helped me with my grief in various ways. So just to give a little bit of background on how I came to start experiencing grief, going through grief. So coming up to 5 years ago, my mum passed away, and it was quite unexpected. And it was all very quick. So yeah, I kind of found myself moving towards media, I guess, to work through the feelings and to process the feelings that came up around that. So that is how I found my way to a lot of these books. And yeah, I hope that you find something in this that might be helpful for you on your journey, or you may have read it, and if you have, please let me know your thoughts. And of course, I'll do a reminder for this at the end because it's very important to me, but if you have any recommendations, then please do let me know, because I'm always open to recommendations. So we're starting off strong with When Breath Becomes Air by Kalanithi. So with this one, I found quite a lot of comfort coming from the words being said by the person who is dying. I think that quite often books on grief, they tend to be covered by the people who are experiencing grief from the person who passed away. And so a book that, about death and grief coming from the person who passed away, kind of, I don't know, it felt very comforting to me. It also kind of goes through his life from where he was a medical student through to becoming a neurosurgeon, and trying his kind of life quest to find meaning and purpose, which then obviously to have found out so young, he was only 36, to have found out so young then that he will be dying. It just kind of turns all of that on its head a little bit more, and he analyses it more. And yeah, I don't know, it stood out to me. So for each book, I'm also going to share a quote or a few quotes from it that really stood out to me. So for this one here, and I'm going to read it from my notes so that I don't mess it up. But the quote from this book that really stood out to me is, "There is a moment, a cusp, when the sum of gathered experience is worn down by the details of living. We're never so wise as when we live in this moment." So that is my first recommendation. So the next book that I'm going to recommend is called The In-Between: Unforgettable Encounters in Life's Final Moment. And this is by Hadley Vlahos, which I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I don't have a copy of this book because I actually listened to the audiobook of this, and I just completely, I couldn't stop listening to it basically. It was just absolutely full of just very touching, very human stories. And so it's a memoir written by Hadley, and it's about her time as a palliative care nurse, so going to people's houses, people who are end of life, and spending time with them, and yeah, the stories that she gathered from the people that she worked with. And as I was listening to the stories, it was so easy for me to connect to all the patients, and to kind of get to hear their stories as well felt so important for the time in my life that I listened to this book. So I actually have a couple of quotes from this one. The first one is, "I'm continually amazed at how life just continues on as usual despite the tragedy that exists all around us." So this quote stood out to me because that is something that I felt massively during those early years of going through my grief. And also it's something that I spoke about with other family members too, just this feeling of not really, how do I explain this, of how we all just kind of move through life and, you pop to the shop and see people in there kind of going about their day, or, you're walking down the street and you walk past someone, you might say hi, but how we're all just moving through our existence, carrying so much and not knowing what the person who might be sat right next to us on the train is also carrying. And that's something that became so apparent to me during particularly the early few years of going through this grief journey. The second quote from this book is actually a quote that was said by one of the patients, and it is, "I always thought I would have had more time. I wish I would have spent more time with my loved ones. I wish I'd just eaten the damn cake." And I think this is just, it's a great quote. I think it just puts into perspective how when those final times, those final stages come for all of us eventually, because as much as it's really easy to kind of dismiss that will be a part of our lives, it will happen to everybody. I think hearing about those things that people in that situation reflect back on as being some things that they maybe wish they had more of or less of. I think a theme that comes up quite a lot is like, I wish I'd worked less, I wish I'd, that sort of thing. I think hearing that and really taking it in and thinking about how you can kind of implement more of that into your life is so valuable. And yeah, if you're ever wondering whether you should have the cake, I mean, you should always have the cake. Like, that's a given. So yeah. So the next book on my list, which is a book that I recommend to people all the time, whether they're going through grief or not, I just think it's an incredible book. It is Crying in H Mart by Zauner. So as I said, this is my number one book that I recommend to people, particularly if they're going through grief, but in general I have recommended it to people who aren't, just because I think it's a great book. So also, this book made me cry so much. I actually started reading it on a train, which that really was not a good idea. I was on a train on my way to Bath to go for a day out, and I thought, I'll start reading my new book. Oh my gosh, I don't even know, maybe not even like 50 pages in, and I was already just crying, like kind of looking out the train window, just like tear coming down and trying to, I don't know, hide it, but also I couldn't. I just was so, it really got to me, like the wording that she uses at this particular point, which I will mention in a second, and yeah, just so much of it just felt so like raw and honest, which I think is a really commendable quality for a book about grief to have. So obviously, with this one being my favourite, I do have a few quotes to share from this one. So the first one is, "It felt like the world had divided into two different types of people, those who had felt pain and those who had yet to." So for me, this quote really stood out because that I was only 27 when my mum passed away, and that was and it still is now. I'm 32 now, and it still is a feeling that I carry, but it's this feeling of not necessarily being able to relate to the people around you anymore, and that just happens like overnight when something like this happens, where you just start to feel a little bit like people around you aren't getting it, which of course you can't expect people to get it. Even with things not like this, you can't always expect people to like get it or understand your perspective on something. But yeah, it really did feel like, and as I said, it still does sometimes feel like the people in my life were like I couldn't really explain it to them, even if they wanted to hear it or wanted to try and understand. I couldn't really explain it because it's such a specific type of pain that you only experience it when you go through it. So yeah, that quote really stood out to me for that. The next quote that I've got here, which is the one I mentioned earlier from the train, she says that every time I remember that my mother is dead, it feels like I'm colliding with a wall that won't give. There's no escape, it's just a hard surface that I keep ramming into over and over. a reminder of the immutable reality that I will never see her again. So, yeah, it's quite heavy. But that quote really stood out to me because, and this is something I've actually been reflecting on quite a bit recently, that I might try and work out a way to share more on it or more of my thoughts around it or something. But you kind of, for me anyway, I realised that there was now this kind of block between finding out more about myself, my family, and just a lot of my past. And that's what that quote really brought forward for me, is this feeling of that you are hitting a wall now. There's kind of like, you can't find anything else out, you can't get answers to things, you can't question things and maybe try to figure out certain elements of yourself through being able to have those conversations with, in my situation, with my mum, but you know, and anybody in your life who you lose. You can't have that anymore. And yeah, as I said, that's something that's been on my mind quite a bit lately. So I don't know, maybe I'll do some more thinking on how I can share more around that. But although I'm saying that and I'm like, what would I share? Because I can't get any answers. But you know, I don't know, I'll figure that out. So the next book is not strictly about grief or loss, but there are elements of it in there. But it is The Examined Life by Stephen Grosz. I did look up the pronunciation of this, and there were a few options. So I hope I'm getting it right. But yeah, that is my next recommendation. So after my mum passed away, I found myself getting very into kind of psychology and why we think the way we do, why we do the things that we do. And I started to kind of venture into these sorts of books, consuming this sort of media, just to try and, I guess, maybe make sense of what I was feeling, but through other people's experiences or through other people's words. I just have a few quotes from this one that stood out and I felt like they were relevant to this video. The first one is that closure is just as delusive. It's a false hope that we can deaden our living grief. And this kind of relates to what I said about like hitting that wall and not being able to ask more questions, because that has elements of closure in it for certain things. And I think, yeah, when I was reading these, I read them around a similar time and I kind of saw a link there with those two quotes that I'd pulled out, and just, I guess it explained to me that that's probably what I was looking for in like a lot of elements. But it's also something that even if you get it, a part of you will be satisfied, but it won't take away the grief that you're feeling, because one of the biggest things about grief is one day you're like up here having the best time, and the next day you could be down here having the worst day of your life when it comes to your processing of grief. So yeah, it just kind of stood out to me for that reason. And the next quote from this one is just a short one: there cannot be change without loss. And yeah, I mean, I think that's the case for so many things in our life. I think that particularly when you go through parental loss, you really change as a person, not always in the most obvious of ways. Like, I don't really see myself as being that different to how I've always been in a lot of ways, but then there are certain smaller elements of your processing or the way you view things or how you interact with others that do change, and you maybe don't even notice it until you kind of, I don't know, reflect on how maybe you would have handled something before the loss. So yeah, that's just a short one, but it's a good one. So the next one is A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis. So C.S. Lewis wrote this after his wife passed away, and I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that it was a series of kind of shorter letters, writings to himself, diary entries, things like that, that were found and turned into a book. I think that's what it was. And this book was recommended to me, and I read it. I actually only read it last year, and I read it on such a beautiful day, sat in a local park, and the sun was shining, and yeah, it was just such a lovely environment to read it in, because it really is just like such a beautiful love letter to his wife, as well as being his observations on his own grief. Again, it's another time that I've read one of these books in public when I really probably shouldn't, because I did cry. But I managed to kind of, keep it a little bit in check, I think. And I think with this one, it does really make you reflect on your own grief, but you really, for my experience of reading it anyway, it's very short. And I found that I just felt so consumed in his grief for his loss, because the way he writes about his wife and the love that was there, the love that's still there, was just really beautiful. I do have a few quotes from this one. And the first one is, "I see people as they approach me trying to make up their minds whether they'll say something about it or not. I hate if they do and if they don't." And this, if you've gone through grief, which if you're watching this, there might be a chance that you have, this I think is quite a universal feeling in the people I've spoken to anyway, and definitely my experience, where I, particularly in the first, few months afterwards, I was so disappointed in the people around me when they didn't ask about it or check in about it or anything like that. I felt so disappointed and so kind of alone. But then again, when they did, it almost felt impossible to say much beyond, just kind of getting on with it, or just, gotta deal with it. Like it was really hard to, it was really hard to navigate what you actually wanted in that situation. It was quite a tricky thing for me to work through my thoughts around that. However, it's also one of those things, as I said, I was only 27. Most of the people in my life around me were similar age, maybe a little younger or a little older. And so that relatability and like knowing what to say to someone in that situation isn't gonna necessarily be there. So yeah, but seeing it written down, it's good. It just kind of like validates some of the feelings that you have around that time if you are feeling that way. So the next quote, it kind of relates to what I said about how you've got these super highs and these lows, and it's so unpredictable when you're going through grief. And the quote is, "Grief is like a long valley, a winding valley where any bend may reveal a totally new landscape." And yeah, as I said, you don't, particularly in those early years, but it stays with you. It stays with you. I mean, I'm like 5 years in now, and sometimes you do have those days where you've got the highs and you're feeling good, but then you could have the smallest thing happen. I remember I was watching TV and an advert came on for like feminine hygiene products, sanitary towels, things like that, and I just burst into tears. And it was the music that was with it, it was, the relationships in the advert, just all of it. And I'd been having an alright day. I'd been having an okay day. I was probably just watching, some program that I was enjoying, and then that advert came on and I just burst into tears. So yeah, it's very unpredictable, but I feel like that quote really captures it. So those are all the books that I am going to recommend for now. As I said, I did say that I would mention a few films, and I'm just going to say this again, I don't know anything about films. I mean, I don't really know anything about books, to be honest, but I definitely don't know anything about films. And my kind of taking from these films is just like, it either made me cry loads when I needed it, or it was just really lovely. So I'm just going to mention those here. So the first one is Soul, which is a Disney Pixar film, and I love animated films, but that film made me cry so much, but it was just so touching. The story, I've watched it a few times actually, and the story is just beautiful, and it just really gets you thinking about your connection to your purpose, which I have actually done a video on purpose, which I might be able to link somewhere, or if I can't work out how to do it in the video, I'll put it in the description. But yeah, it just really gets you thinking about your connection to your purpose. The next film is one called Petite Maman, which was just beautiful. I think probably quite a lot of it probably just went over my head, but I was just enjoying the vibes. Like, it was so beautiful. It's about a little girl who finds the young version of her mum in a forest, and they start to play together, and yeah, it's just really lovely. It has such a comforting vibe, and it just felt like it was kind of nourishing my inner child, even if that was kind of in a way that I maybe didn't fully understand. And the last one, now I don't really know if I'm going to say that I'm recommending this film, because it's very heavy. It's very tough. Oh, it was very tough for me. I really want to watch it again, but I just don't know if I can do it to myself. I would say All of Us Strangers, if you have dealt with parental loss, will absolutely rip your heart out. It is, oh my god. I'm like laughing because it's like, if I don't laugh I'll cry. I was crying for so long after watching that, and it was like I would think about it and just start crying. It was just so devastating. So for me, like, this comes under the category of like, I feel like I really need to have a good cry, then I would watch that. So if you feel like that, I don't know, but read up on it first, because I do think, from my perspective of it and also people in my life who've watched it, I just think it's best to go into it kind of knowing a little bit about it, because it was really upsetting. But yeah, I think those are all my recommendations for today's video. Oliver has decided to turn around, so I would love to do one of these videos again to share more with you, but as I said at the beginning, I love recommendations. So if you have any recommendations that you want to drop down in the comments, please do, because I'm always making a note of things that are recommended to me. Also, if you have read or watched any of those things, let me know your thoughts. I would love to hear that, particularly if you had different perspectives on some of the things that I've shared, then it would be really interesting to read that. So that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.